Welcome to the weekly news roundup. It is February the 15th, Thursday after Ash Wednesday. And as always, I'm Brian McCall. I'm happy to be joined by Mary Rundis. Hope you're off the starting blocks of Lent going well into the second day.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's a new season. It came very quickly this year, but yeah, it's good to be in this new penitential season.
It is. And, it is a season. It's time a little bit of withdrawal from the world, kind of go on a retreat in a sort of simple sense, a little sense. But maybe if you're staying off the news, this can be the one thing you do through Lent, where we'll kind of let you know what's going on if you're trying to stay a little bit away from it. And some things have certainly happened this week. We first want to talk about a blockbuster story that we mentioned last week that was occurring, and that is Tucker in the Kremlin. Tucker Carlson conducted a long 2-hour interview with Vladimir Putin. He's done some follow up things. We're going to give you our kind of take on that, or at least a preliminary take on it. And flowing from that, he had some interesting things to say about old Boris, the Boar Johnson, and we sort of have this failing in the uniparty, right? Boris is supposedly conservative, Biden's supposedly liberal, but they're really part of this uniparty. Failed leadership and kind of some parallels between just their utter failures as leaders, Biden and Boris. Then we're going to look at this Joel Olstein megachurch shooting, and just there's some very strange things coming out of the police investigation about the alleged shooter and whether they're a man or a woman or what. And another trend that goes with really in the past couple of years we're going to talk about. And then speaking of transgender, we're going to talk round up with another story about how Pope Francis really wants to push women deaconesses. And maybe that is on the agenda if he's around for Synod Part 2 next October. So full lineup of stories. But as always, take a little bit look at the liturgy. As we mentioned, today is we're not yet in the first week in Lent. That starts Sunday. We're in this sort of little half week. We kind of get a little half week start Thursday. But you want to tell us a little bit about the history of the season?
Yeah, something I wanted to highlight is really just to look at how weak really the Western church has become, the Latin side of the church, which used to be known for its penitential practices. We know a lot of this, especially from the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas, but even going back to St. Augustine of Canterbury. Um, St. Augustine of Canterbury and also Pope St. Gregory the Great. There's a great article in 1 Peter 5 called The Forgotten Customs of Lent. And a few things to highlight. They would abstain the entire season of Lent from flesh meat, all animal products. They basically went vegan for Lent, if you want to think of it that way. Milk, cheese, eggs. It would just be a complete abstinence from it. Ash Wednesday, Good Friday, nobody would eat anything, and during a Holy Week, there would be a very strict fast of just bread, salt, water, and some seasonings. So that's what the Western church's base was for its penitential practice for quite some time. But that changed. It started off, things didn't all start with the Second Vatican Council with the loosening of things. We can go back to Benedict the 14th. That's in the 18th century, with a document called Non Ambignius, which I think I pronounced that wrong, but it's he granted permission to eat meat on some fasting days, and that even got lightened even more with Pope Leo the 13th in a separate document where he allowed meat, eggs, and milk products on Sundays of Lent, along with during the main meal as well. So things started to get softened, began to be softened there, and then of course after the Second Vatican Council, things just kind of went all out the window, where today we have days of strict abstinence on Fridays, which most traditional Catholics are used to anyways, and then some days of fast and abstinence. So the customs have really deteriorated, but it should be mentioned that they still remain in the Eastern Church. The Eastern Orthodox still remain, they still have many of these strict practices in their church. The Eastern Catholic churches do as well. So one thing I wanted to mention is that as the Latin right, as Catholics within the Latin Rite, we really should try to double up on our penances. Of course, consult your spiritual director, but we want to make sure that the Eastern Orthodox and the Eastern Catholics, for that matter, don't put us to shame. We need to go back to the great traditions of our fathers and make sure we take those penitential practices seriously.
Yeah, it is an interesting area, an interesting history, right? Because the Second Vatican Council, post council, just sort of throw everything out the window. But
Mm,
there was this discernible trend, and I think it goes even back a little before Benedict the 14th. I think you could argue, and one way to think about that is the church getting softer, or is it the church as a mother recognizing we are getting weaker, that human beings are kind of digressing, right? The Whig view of
mm,
history is everybody's getting better. Like everything's always better. We're always better than the dumb people before us. But the church's view has actually been, we're getting weaker.
mm,
We're a little bit more like children. And again, wants to push us. But as St. Thomas says, you have to kind of make laws that are suitable to what the people can do. So I think some of that is the church recognizing in the modern world, people have gotten soft, and in terms of pain of mortal sin, the church as a mother says, "Well, I can't." Maybe in the 12th century, that was
mm,
more realistic, but we have to take you where you are. But that doesn't mean, I think, is really important to your point. It doesn't mean she just said, "Well, just like stop doing it." It
mm,
says under pain of mortal sin, we're only going to say this is all you have to do. Again, that got even radically lower post Pius the 12th, but even up to Pius the 12th, it was certainly easier. But that didn't mean that you can't go and do more according to your abilities and your prudence, etc. Obviously, if you're a pregnant mother or something like that, but that is important. We can look back to these practices, and it's wrong to say like, well, we're traditional Catholics; they're the law still.
right, right,
They're
yeah.
not the law, but just because we've gotten so positivistic, like if it's not the law, I can do whatever I want. Well, if the law is fast and partial abstinence, or if it's just abstinence on Friday, really we can certainly do more than that, and certainly look to these different practices as ways of looking. And it's true that if you look at the liturgy, for particularly beautiful liturgy for Ash Wednesday, if you were there, Lent is about fasting. It's funny, in the
Mm,
new church they want to, like, yeah, you got to fast, but Lent's so much more than fasting. And it is, I mean, it is. Fasting is a means in many ways. It's not the ultimate goal, but it was about fasting. You see the liturgy, and the whole gospel is about when you fast. Right? Here's what you should do, and it is important that that is to be part of us. Why, as St. Paul said, to help us to train our wills, also as a way of just doing penance, of suffering some small amount. And it is meant, it was really at the heart of it. Again, not the end of it. We should be increasing prayer as well. Another goal of fasting is it should help us sort of, we have more time for prayer. We're not spending so much time preparing meals, etc. But it's hard, and the church recognizes it's hard. And that's why what's beautiful things are added in the liturgy as little things to sort of help us. And one of those, the most beautiful, is every weekday mass, so excluding the Sunday, after the post communion, there's a special little prayer that the priest says. So he says the post communion, he says, "Humilitate capita vesta Deo," bow down your heads before God. And the substance of that prayer, it varies every day, but it's essentially a variation on a theme. Like, you need help. Your people need your help, God, help them, because this
mm.
fasting thing, this Lent thing is really hard. And it's, that's what I think is just beautiful about the church. She calls us to be higher and move and do more, but she recognizes without me you can do nothing. She needs to invoke special aid. So I always think, if you want to do you can't get to mass, read that prayer. If you can, one little thing you can do, read that prayer every day, because it's a nice little inspiration that the church is praying for perseverance in whatever you've chosen. A few other things interesting: Monday, Wednesday, and Friday during the gradual and the tract, the priest says a little longer one, and he kneels down. So he kneels down and says, "We have been brought low." Right. Again, another theme of Lent is that theme of humility. Remembering, we've just had this great joy of Christmas, but remembering, who we really are. There's great meditations the first week of the Ignatian retreats. We're nothing. The principle and foundation. God is everything. We are nothing. And this root of our sin is we think we're greater than we are. And that just little bit of the liturgy, having to kneel down, say that little bit of the psalm, and remember, we are brought down low, and we're only brought up through what we're anticipating, the coming of Christ. Also, the simplicity in the liturgy. Things are gradually taken away from us through Lent, right? So
Mm.
we lose the Alleluia, that disappears at Septuagesima. The vestments go to purple. The colors, flowers are banned from the altar, right? Taken away, until eventually all the statues and images in the sanctuary will disappear, will be covered as we get to Passiontide, right? So that withdrawal of the senses, the sort of mortification of the senses, beautifully sort of to inspire us, a kind of a spiritual fast from these consolations in the liturgy, to go along with the bodily fast. So beautiful. I'll just share one last. The sermon I heard, which was, I went to a school mass, was primarily for the school children. The day before was on Shrove Tuesday, and the priest speaking to the school kids, the boys particularly, it was the boys' school, said, "Come on, I don't want to hear you gave up Skittles for Lent." He's like, "Come on, be a man, do something, right? I gave up Skittles." He's like, so, and I think to come full circle to your theme, be a man. Like, yes, be prudent. Obviously, if you're on chemotherapy and you need to do what your doctor says, but absent some extraordinary circumstance, be a man.
Mhm. Amen to that.
So speaking of being a man, Tucker Carlson, he did go through with it. As we talked about last week, he may have a death wish, uh, literally, by doing this. I mean, he has been denounced as a traitor by quote left and right, the uniparty, right, Republicans, Democrats, for going and talking to someone, asking them questions. And it's kind of amazing that's what we've come to, that liberalism, this is the end point of liberalism. Freedom of speech, let everybody talk, everybody should have their say, ends in, but not you. Like, we don't want to
Mm.
hear from you. And again, whatever you think of Putin, I like, not like, if we're funding his enemy, and we really appear to have uh, sparked a war that has potential global consequences, what's wrong with actually hearing what the person has to say? Now, you might listen to it and say, I think he's lying, I think he's dead wrong, I think, but to just say, I'm not going to listen, I can't hear, is what's, I think, been really, really interesting about the reaction, to this interview. So Tucker Carlson he sat down in the Kremlin with Putin. Apparently, he kept him waiting for hours, which is something Putin does. Apparently, when people come to see, that's his, I guess, thing. He makes you wait. So he waited a long time. He eventually got the interview. They sat talking, and it really was extraordinary. You're not going to really be able to hear it, but I'll just sort of put it a little in the footage in the background so you can watch. Um, Tucker Carlson starts with sort of the obvious question: why'd you invade Ukraine? And Putin says, "Well, give me 30 seconds or a minute to give you a little backstory, a little history." And that 30 seconds or a minute is about 25 minutes in the
Mm.
entire interview, where he starts in the conversion of Russia in the 9th century, and he walks through this amazing sort of tour of Russian history, all to eventually get up to what he says, that he didn't start a war in Ukraine, that he was finishing a war begun in 2014, that it was kind of the next phase. And it's sort of interesting because the news media had reported for 2 years that he called it a special military operation, not launching a war. And I never could have understood, like, what's he talking about? What does he mean by that? And I think what he meant made sense here, that he's like, well, no, I didn't start the war. NATO, the United States, and Ukraine started a war in 2014, and there was kind of a lull, and I'm responding to it. And that, again, whether you agree with his analysis or his interpretation of the facts or not, it gives you an insight into the way he thinks. The other thing I took from it is it was a classic example of the difference between Russian and American just worldviews and mindsets, right? So Tucker Carlson, by his own admission, was getting really annoyed when
Mm.
Putin's talking, and he's like interrupted him, and he tried to, say, hey, we can move on. And he said, I thought he was filibustering. I thought he was wasting my time. Like, I asked you a question, give me the answer. Very American. but for Putin, what it showed to me, again, whether you think of what he's doing was right or wrong, it is the way Russians think. Like there is no the 900s and the year 1316. It's all like relevant. It is all they think in long terms. Russians, again, characteristic of Russian people, they play a long game. History is a long game, and it comes through in the way he speaks. Like he literally, I think Tucker finally admits he's like, I don't think he was playing me. I think it just literally is he can't think about 2024 in 2024. Everything is connected back for centuries and centuries and centuries. And I think that really does come through in the interview. That is very uniquely Russian. And again, the art of diplomacy is you should understand the person you're talking to, their culture, so you can actually have better diplomacy. Whereas modern U.S. diplomacy is sort of forget about who they are, just impose your will on them, which has not worked out too well. But it was a fascinating interview. Again, for whatever it's worth, obviously he's promoting his side, Putin. He's a spokesman for his country. He's going to present it most favorably. But I found that long game of history, that this is much more complicated than many people say. Together with the fact that I think Carlson picked up on this, there are some deep wounds there in Putin, and I think represented by those who support him. Again, whatever we say about him, he is not unpopular in Russia. I mean, he may be a bad leader, he may be a totalitarian, maybe, but he certainly got a lot of support. And I think the people that do he expressed a legitimate grievance, which is Soviet Union fell, communism fell. We thought your whole goal was to welcome Russia into the family of nations, and you spurned us. It was a really telling part when he says, like, I asked, hey, could I join NATO? Can we? Yeltsin actually, asked, and we were just sort of rebuffed. And again, very, very telling, very Russian. That's very present, and you could see it in the way Putin tells the story. Like this happened 30 years ago, but he's telling as if it happened last week. And again, for an American, I think the best thing I got out of it is that appreciation. For us to be like, whatever, that happened in the 90s. Like, who cares? But to him, it was clearly from the way he spoke, very, very, very raw. Last bit, he's now doing, Tucker, a couple of follow-up shorts. I think some of these are free. Some you may have to join his network, but I found them just as fascinating as the interview. He's basically going around and he says, it's sort of a great condemnation of the ineffectiveness of American policy. So like maybe you think sanctions are right, like he should be sanctioned, but he sort of goes around and says, well, right or wrong, they're actually not working. Right. I said, we'd be led to believe like Russia's in dire straits because of sanctions. And he goes through, he does one thing in the Russian subway, contrast with the hellhole that New York subways are right now. He goes to a grocery store that's sort of overflowing and buys a week's worth of groceries for like $100. All the McDonald's get shut down because of the sanctions, and he basically all get purchased by a Russian guy who changes the name and keeps going as kind of basically like a McDonald's. And he's like, yeah, seems to be doing fine. There's a Starbucks, which becomes Stars, I think, but it's got the same like little lady with the weird crowd. To his credit, he says, I'm not even going to go there and try it because even if it's just like Starbucks, it's terrible coffee, which I can't agree with him more. But they're really, really fascinating. And what's really important about it is if we're having a conflict with this country, the largest country in the world, isn't it helpful to know what's really going on, what life is like there, what people are like there? Again, you still may say, we're doing the right thing, we're going to do what we're doing, but you're much more informed. And the fact that people are basically saying he's a traitor and should be arrested for treason for going and doing journalism, one would say, is to me really the most telling part of this. But you're really very fascinated in this region. As many of our viewers may know, you did an article on the history of Ukraine and Russia that appeared in the paper. So let's get your reactions to this.
Yeah, there's a lot in this interview. As you said, it is quite lengthy. And so to our audience, do be on the lookout. We plan to publish a thorough analysis really of the entire interview. A few things stand out though. And the first thing is that, and this will stand out to most American viewers, is as you mentioned, Putin's way of going about this comes across as how a statesman should come across. Even if you disagree with the substance of his claims, he comes across as like a British Pitt the Younger, or one of these brilliant, statesmen who is familiar with the art of being a statesman, compared to our American politicians who just do sort of very short slogans to try to get attention from people, even if we do like the substance of some of the leaders. So that's the first thing that really caught my attention. I think Tucker Carlson, even though I credit him for running getting this interview, one of the first Putin interviews in quite a while, he still came across as very American, wanting these short little bits when Putin was
Yes.
wanting actually something of substance. As he kept joking, he said, "Do you want a real conversation or not?" And I think that's we need more of that. Something that also I think people should be aware of, though, is that the even though the grand arc of history argument that he was making, I like to see that, but that can easily become a fallacy, right? It's a common fallacious tactic where you sort of have this, large grand arc of history narrative. You make one little slip in the middle of it, and at the end, the argument is false, but it appears that the argument is more elaborate than it actually is. So I want people to be aware of that.
Mhm.
Just because Putin's argument is so long and lengthy doesn't automatically make his claims credible, and we plan to go into that in the future in a future video. Another thing that got my attention, though, is the narrative that Putin wants to establish the USSR, that he somehow dreams of connecting himself to that legacy. I think this interview completely debunked. Putin went at lengths to distance himself from the USSR, which I found very interesting. He even would sort of discredit some of Lenin's reasonings, which I thought was interesting. Um, I think people are going to note that there is a problem with Putin's view of what Russia is, which I see a lot of critiques about Putin and his view of Russia. He doesn't think it's necessarily a Russian state or an ethnically Russian state. He went at lengths to say that. And if that's true, I think to some extent it makes his argument less credible against Ukraine, because he'll talk about Ukraine and saying that this is sort of an artificial thing. There is no such thing as a Ukrainian, because there really is no solid ethnic basis for Ukraine. I think he sort of discredited himself by saying Russia isn't for Russians, it's for all kinds of people. He even mentioned the toleration of Islam and all these other religions.
Yeah, there was definitely. I think you're right. There was a tension in what he was saying, kind of like one side of his mouth. Well, there's really no such thing as Ukrainian. They're all Russians. They're part of Russia, and
Yeah.
Russia isn't an ethnicity in another. But so you're right. Now again, maybe if you pressed him on that, he could
Mm.
square that
Yeah.
circle. But on its face, it was a little contradictory. Yeah.
And it's strange to me, because something I detailed in my article, which everybody should check out, the February issue of the paper. It's quite a good issue. It's in there. Something that I note there is the Russian view of history. It comes from a man, Kluchevsky, and
Hmm.
Kluchevsky started this sort of narrative of there is the all Russian people, which contains the great Russians, which are what we call the Russians, and the little Russians, which are the Ukrainians. If what Putin tried to do, from what I saw, is to distance himself from that by changing the terms. He's now saying simply Russian without any distinction between Ukrainian and Russian, and he's trying to make it more as if it's a nation state rather than a people. So
Hmm.
we'll go into more of it at a later date, as I mentioned. But just to kind of wrap things up on this, at the very least, we have to start taking this man seriously and his claims seriously. He's not. We can't listen to the BBC, who came out with a whole bunch of nonsense articles about this, saying that, well, the man is just an extremist with nonsense history. He doesn't know what he's talking about. This was sort of just gobbledygook. No, he's making a serious claim, and it deserves examination. And like you said, we need to at least know what the other side is saying. And it's not fair to just dismiss him out of hand with a sort of nostalgic view of the past, saying that, well, we need to view the Russians as the enemy no matter what. Look, the USSR is over. This is a different state than the communist USSR. We need to start treating it differently.
Absolutely, and ultimately, we know Russia's in need of conversion. Our Lady
Yeah.
says Russia will be converted. She's still to be converted. So she's certainly not, the great Catholic country coming to the rescue of the world. But Father Gruner always used to say the conversion of Russia will be miraculous. It will have to be something happen relatively quickly, so it's clear. But the seeds of it will have to be kind of there for Our Lady to work with. And again, so it's such an important country, given Our Lady stressing the importance that the errors of Russia would spread, that it's Russia that needs to be consecrated and converted, that Catholics have an even greater need to be aware of what's going on in Russia than even any other American. But do watch out, and we're really hoping that you can put together that deeper dive into the interview. So watch our channels for that.
Yeah.
Before we go into the next story, I want to mention that again, Angelico Press is sponsoring the Catholic Family News weekly news roundup this week. You can purchase from them with the affiliate link below, which helps us. There's the QR code. They are a Catholic apostolate that both publishes new books, so newly written books such as Bound by Truth of Dr. Peter Kwasniewski, and also reprints books, older titles that have gone out of print. And I want to focus on one of those today because it's really good for Lent. It's interesting. A lot of people, and I was this for a long time, right? Lent comes along, you go to Stations of the Cross. I always thought Alphonsus Liguori, Stations of the Cross was it. Like, that's the only way you could do the Stations of the Cross, because anytime I went, that's all there was, right? Is St. Alphonsus Liguori. And no, I mean, I love St. Alphonsus Liguori. We did an interview about him, and they're wonderful. But there's actually a rich tradition in the church of different ways of the cross. His seems to be one that particularly traditional Catholic churches, that's all they use, but it isn't the only one, as good as it is. And so you might like a little variety. Well, one of the things they've done, and there's some other collections out there, but they've recently published a 7 Ways of the Cross, a collection of 7 different meditations. Now, according to the church, to make the Ways of the Cross, you just have to meditate on each station, go from station to station. But the subject of your meditation, which you read, is not prescribed by the church. But this was written by Jean Gallo. I know you see the SJ, but it's preconciliar. So he was actually, a good Jesuit. It was published pre-council, but it's a collection that he has of 7 different ways of the cross. He was a regular contributor to L'Osservatore Romano back when that was a Catholic paper. He was a man of great erudition, profound spirituality, and really this was a great resource for Catholics if you want to vary your ways of the cross throughout Lent. Went out of print shortly after the council. I think it's been out of print for a long time, but thanks to Angelico, they brought it back. So there's a link in the description of the video that will bring you directly to the page for this book and through the CFN affiliate link, so that your purchase will go to support Catholic Family News. So thank you to Angelico for sponsoring this program, and wanted to highlight that particularly Lenten book for everyone. So back to the show. One of the things in the Tucker Carlson interview was basically how he said Boris Johnson is the reason there's still fighting going on, that there was a peace deal on the table. Putin claims it was signed or initialed. He kind of vacillated a little bit on that, but some indication that the Ukrainians were accepting it, and Boris Johnson came into town and scuttled it. So you want to talk about, we've had this claim together with some interesting things of our own resident here, the infirmed in chief, kind of failed leadership on the left and right.
Yeah, absolutely. And for some of our American listeners, or just really our listeners outside of England who might not know so much about British politics, Boris Johnson was the leader of the Conservative Party in the UK, which, just so we're clear, that does not make them sort of conservative in the way we think about it.
Yeah.
All of the different parties in Europe are much more left leaning than the ones here, even the one here in even the United States. So Boris
It's
Johnson
like
was
the one in Canada is even worse.
Oh, yeah, right. It's so
Yeah.
all of these, it's Boris Johnson, not necessarily a conservative bulwark, but I must say, even back in the day of Brexit, I was a big fan of Boris Johnson because he wanted to get the UK out of the EU. But anyways, yes, Putin highlighted that Boris Johnson sort of told the Ukrainians not to sign this peace deal. That it seemed, we don't know exactly what the terms would have been, but it would have ended the war at the very least.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to highlight is that the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom is completely failing because they've let down their country. And one of the things I wanted to show is firstly to talk about the immigration crisis. We think it's bad here in the United States. I think you can make the argument it's actually worse in the United Kingdom. And we've talked about this on the show extensively in Europe in general, with these Muslim immigrants taking over these different nations. I wanted to start out with a video. This is right outside the Parliament, right? This is the United Kingdom right here. This is the center
Mhm.
of England. Here's what's going on there. Right, so we see a sort of Muslim procession. I quite honestly, I'm not exactly sure what they're doing. Looks like some sort of coffin they've got. Got a bunch of men shirtless on right outside of Parliament. We've got sort of black flags, banners. Um, to put it simply, it's an invasion. These men have taken over this country, and this is due to the Conservative Party's lax immigration policies, despite promising its voters that it was going to fix this issue, when in fact it's made it worse. So, what's happening in the United Kingdom now with this? Of course, the economy is being tanked by this. The lives of Englishmen it's becoming worse and worse by the day. What is happening? Well, this is the map of what's going to happen here, there in England, and as you can see, the red is the Labour Party's gains. And so, as you see, this is it's devastating for the Conservative Party. The last election, all of that dark red was held by conservative parties or associated parties that weren't the Conservative Party, and the Labour Party seeming is going to take over most of the country. And it should be stated that most people in the United Kingdom, even left-leaning people, don't like the Labour Party. They're just as bad. They're just as bad as the Conservative Party. They don't really satisfy anyone. Just so we can really get a full extent, here's what the enormous defeat for the Tories would look like. The Tories is a shorthand really for conservatives. Conservative Party would just be decimated. Well, that's the improper use of the term, but it would be demolished, really.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, they'd be behind the Liberal Democrats, who
yes,
were always like the sort of third party that had like a couple of seats. Wow.
exactly, and this has happened once before in, well, yes, really once before in English politics, where the Liberal Party got destroyed and the Labour Party sort of took over as the prominent left-leaning party. The Liberal Party was known for sort of that John Stuart Mill type of liberalism, classical liberalism, if you wanna call it that. And lastly, I don't wanna make this a sort of racial thing, but it's hard not to mention this. This is what the demographics have become over there in the United Kingdom. Uh, Notice around London there in the and all of the major cities, the white British people don't have their country anymore. And again, you can make the argument that the United Kingdom really isn't a British ethnicity, but I think there's something to it. Look at how the London is completely different. You can't even call London British anymore in the sense, or English in that sense.
Mhm.
The whole map of the country is completely different, and it's hard to see how this nation can come back without a return to what makes our country stable, which is sort of like what I mean, I'm not going to endorse what everything Putin has said or done, but there's something about sort of a promotion of a national identity that is worthwhile. And so I think we're going to start seeing a conservative movement that needs to be forced to actually get something of substance, rather than being this weak thing that we have going on with the Tories in the United Kingdom. Something else, if we go to here in the United States, we
Well,
don't have it much
bef
better. Go
but
ahead.
before you get to that, I mean, what's stunning about that map is if you remember that when the most recent election that the Tories won, the Conservatives won, was like 180 degrees from that. It was one of the greatest landslides in British politics. They won seats in Parliament that had been held by Labour for decades, and it was kind of everybody was predicting like this is the Labour Party's finished. It's incredible, and now less than 5 years later,
Mm,
this is what it again, it's a poll, but if it were held today and their clock is ticking, they're going to have their election, pretty soon, is like an extraordinary reversal. Now, what happened in between those dates? Essentially, the COVID. the conservatives just let the country down. I mean, they just destroyed their country. I mean, you think it was bad here, it was horrific in London in particular, and they've essentially all that Brexit promised they've destroyed by wrecking their country and not being actually conservative. They won this massive mandate and squandered it. I mean, they changed prime ministers like every 5 minutes because they just had no plan. They had no agenda, and that's sort of the fate of fickle politicians. Is kind of the lesson there, I think.
And it was their battle to lose, really.
Yeah,
I mean,
really.
because I mean, you mentioned those seats. The north of England is historically Labour voting, and they
Yes.
won a lot of those seats. It was seen as a sort of a political miracle at the time. It's sad that the Conservatives didn't get a good Catholic in there like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who would have made an
Yes.
amazing prime minister. But unfortunately, they seem bent on political correctness rather
Yeah.
than political truth. So it's unfortunate. But like I said, in the United States, not much better. Are the president, they finally got him out there for a press conference after he was hiding, probably in the basement of the White House. They didn't want him
Big
out there for the
mistake. Big
yeah, right.
mistake.
They got him out there and he made a many blunders. He came across really as an angry old man. And he was making, even after being questioned on his memory, he made several debacles. One of the things that I want to show here is he mistook the president of Egypt for the president of Mexico. He said he was the president of Mexico. And I'm going to play a small clip. I don't want to play the full thing because it would be 3 minutes of sort of just rambling. It's sad to see. So here's a little bit of it, if we can handle that much.
The response in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, has been over the top. I think that, as you know, initially the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in.
Right. So this is a man that obviously doesn't know what he's doing, and it's the complete opposite of what we saw in a man like Vladimir Putin. And again, we're not endorsing him completely, but it's definitely true to say this man is no statesman. He's barely functioning. So it's we cannot. This can't stand in this country. There's going to have to be radical change in the conservative movement in the United States, in Great Britain, across the world. We cannot have this old guard that is for all of these different parties that have ruined so many lives, ruined the cultures of so many nations. It's we cannot have this anymore, and we can't stand for it. There needs to be legitimate change within these movements.
Yeah, it really was a shame. I mean, they had this press conference because essentially the special counsel said they're not going to prosecute Biden, even though he committed crimes. They admitted it because he's a senile old man and no jury would convict him, which was like more damning than probably convicting him with the statement. And so they threw him out there to like disprove this, and he ended up, well, proving every bit of it. It really, again, whatever you think of Putin, you may disagree with some of his history, you may argue, but the guy sat there for 20 minutes without notes, without a teleprompter, and gave a history lesson for 20 minutes where, this guy doesn't even know where Mexico is. Now, again, if it were a one-off, because I've seen people, he just misspoke it, but it's not a one-off. I mean, this happens all the time. He can't remember, according to the special counsel's report, when he was interviewing him about the documents that were all over his house and his garage, and he's like, he couldn't remember whether he was vice president or not in 2009.
Yeah.
I mean, again, once or twice, maybe you're a little distracted, but a pattern of behavior is not something that's going to get better, right? If you're 80 years old and you're already exhibiting this behavior, it's not like you're going to wake up tomorrow and be, fit mentally. Now, sadly, no one's going to do anything about this, and sadly, it may be an opportunity like the Tories that the Republicans here squander, to actually advance a proper conservative agenda as opposed to just taking power for 4 years and lining your own pockets, or those of, Lockheed Martin or some other defense contractor.
Yeah, exactly. We have to have change within these movements. Biden's not going to work, and really, a lot of the people, the conservatives and the Republicans, are putting out there, that's not satisfactory to fix the problem at hand.
Yes. Well, and hey, enjoying the comments there. I see some recipe advice going on, even for meatless recipes during Lent. So, thank you all for joining us during the live show. It's good to see. Keep a little eye on your conversation. So, turning now to another kind of interesting story. It's sort of the trans agenda is kind of the main theme of this, but we go to back to the United uh, Kingdom, and the Labour Party, who pretty much may be in charge soon, according to
Mm.
the polling, had a member introduce a bill. So they're doing basically an LGBT rights kind of bill and another kind of equality bill, what they're calling it. And remember, the conservatives have an overwhelming majority in Congress. First question: why are they having this bill in the first place? But then this story, it's almost so absurd, but it is really true. You might think that can't be true. Well, this member of parliament, there she is, Charlotte Nichols, is offering an amendment to that bill to say, oh, and also people who are dead should be able to change their gender. Literally, this is how absurd the LGBTQ XYZ ABCDFG agenda has gotten. Like, it's not enough that you get your kids on puberty blockers and start mutilating them, but now, like, your ability to change your gender transcends the grave. Right? I mean, that's her call. The dead people can have their death certificate changed to something else. Now, she doesn't really quite explain how you communicate this from beyond the grave. Like, maybe it's in your will. I guess I know I was a guy, but I want to be buried as a woman. It's sort of how absurd we are. But there actually is, as absurd as the story is, there is a seriousness to it, because so far, at least, the conservatives have held off what's called self-identification. Like, they're promoting the whole agenda. You can do your surgeries, you can mutilate yourself, but you can't just decide and just say, okay, now I'm a female, and go in. And the National Health Service, their socialist health system that doesn't work, is told you, if a person is a woman or a man, you have to treat them that way and put them in their medical records. They can't just say, change my records. You cannot self-identify. And essentially, what a few people have pointed out is what this Charlotte Nichols is doing is trying to backdoor self-identification. Again, this is how they did with euthanasia and assisted suicide, murder. Well, we just, like, your last act, you can change your gender by self-identification, but not before that, not while you're alive, is a backdoor to pushing it further and further, and you can just wake up on one side of the bed and change your form from male to female. That's actually what's at stake. So it's sort of absurd the story is, kind of maybe clickbait, dead people changing their gender. There is a real serious danger behind it. Speaking of danger, there was a shooting again in Texas, this time in Houston, in a mega church. There were a lot of interesting mega church stories. We had one story we looked at that we didn't do, where at another mega church they had a Super Bowl service where they punted the Bible across the sanctuary. Wasn't a Novus Ordo church for once, but I wouldn't be surprised if they pick up on that. Oh, we got to do that too for ecumenism. But this mega church, this guy Joel Olstein, the guy that runs it, a shooter came in and shot a couple people. And again, I hate this term mass shooting, because they have, like, no real definition of it. And literally, I think some people say if there's more than one person shot, it's a mass shooting, which I think is a little disingenuous. It lumps together someone who, like, goes and shoots 20 or 30 people with somebody who shoots a couple. Not the most, I think, helpful category. But in any event, it was a bad thing. There were people shot. So the police arrested the person that went in and was doing the shooting, and identified the person as Genesi Yvonne Moreno. Okay. But then the police are being really cagey, because they then said, well, Genesi actually used a bunch of aliases. Okay, well, criminals do that. Jeffrey, and a whole host of male as well as some female aliases. So a couple reporters have been, so is this a trans person? Like, is it a man or a woman? Like, what, is it a woman? Is it Jeffrey who's turned into Janice, or was it a woman who's now turning into a man, or what is the deal? And the police are basically saying, can't talk to you, can't talk about it, which I don't know. I mean, I'm not here to say what the answer is. I don't know what this Jenny's person is, but why is it such a top secret? Why are the police saying can't talk about it? And it raises questions, right? When you don't explain yourself, it raises questions, which reminds me of the Nashville shooting. So another shooting, more people were harmed in that one. Um, the person basically was said to be transgender. That police let that out, and they left a manifesto. Here's why I did it. The police won't release it. And again, question why? Is it because it says something about being transgender? Is it, again, why? And again, I don't have answers, but when things don't add up and they raise questions, it's worse than when you get answers. Like, you might not like the answer, or you might say, oh, I thought of something else. But the lack of forthcomingness is really, really interesting, as well as the reaction. Because first of all, when this reaction started, people saying, oh, this person could be transgender. It appears they are. The next thing is they immediately started saying, oh, they can't be transgender because Joel Osteen is also transgender. I don't know if you saw this. There was a bunch of people started accusing him, and his church had to come out and say, like, he's not. Like, that's just made up. But they, like, where did that come from? Why, like, this shooter may have been trans? Well, they can't be, because why would they shoot another trans person? It was mostly ridiculous. Like, whatever. He's a crazy Protestant preacher. I'm sure I agree with zero of his theology, but it appears he's not at all trans. Like, he's not. That's not his thing. But it reminded me of what happened after the Nashville shooting. So, one of the people from Turning Point USA put out a tweet. I think it was still called a tweet then. It was before X, I think. Maybe it was X. Said, the Colorado Springs shooter identified as non-binary. The Denver shooter identified as trans. The Aberdeen shooter identified as trans. The Nashville shooter identified as trans. One thing is very clear: the modern trans movement is radicalizing activists into terrorists. Now, you might disagree with his conclusion. You might say it goes too far, but facts are facts. And he's saying, like, this is kind of weird. Look at all the, and why is it kind of being kept hush hush? Why is nobody talking about this? And the reaction was vociferous from the news media. The fact checkers. No. And they don't actually deny that his facts are wrong. They kind of admit them. Yeah, they were. But no, there's more people that are not trans that commit. Now, again, relative to the population, the amount of people that, quote, are like, or claim to be like this, is a small part of the population. So absolute numbers don't tell the story. You might say, well, there were more people who don't say they're trans who shot people. Maybe true, but what is the relative population? And again, the fact checkers don't want to go there. But it's interesting. Now, what am I saying? I'm not saying every person that's in the trans movement is a killer, but it really goes to this question. If you're doing something against nature, right? You are trying to force yourself to be something you're not. What psychologists and doctors said for decades, until it became politically incorrect, is it's harmful, right? Taking massive hormones that don't belong in your body, mutilating your body, forcing yourself to act the way you're not, be something you're not, is going to have harmful effects. Again, harmful effects isn't a one-to-one correlation that will make you go kill someone. But again, it's a question that should be asked. Is this a consequence of the trans movement? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the answer of the mainstream media and the corporate America Inc. is shut up. You can't talk about that. That's politically incorrect. And again, maybe there's not a connect. Maybe it's a correlation. Maybe it's not a causation. But the very sad thing in the country is it's like you're not even allowed to talk about it and say, well, could this be an effect of this promotion of this agenda? Could it be contributing, leading to it? And again, maybe it actually lessens the culpability of some of these people. Like, if it's shown that shooting themselves up with these hormones is messing with their mind, some level of culpability, but maybe it actually says, you know what? They're victims to an extent here. And so it's not saying it like to be harsh to these people. I just don't know. But I know we're not going to get to any answer if we don't deal with it. A very related issue. There's a great video over at SSPX podcasts with Father Robinson on marijuana. And he did a little book. He and the late Father Scarra, did a little book. with some fascinating information on the legalization of marijuana. And they say in the podcast, they go through more detail that there's a real correlation of increase of violent crime with the use of marijuana. And they go through some medical evidence, scientific evidence that it leads you to certain psychological behaviors of paranoia, which is contributing to people doing these random shootings, these sort of just, if you notice a lot of these, some of these shooters, public shooters, you'll hear people go on the news and say, I've known them all their life. It's just so strange. They're really nice people, but something snaps. And one of the things they argue in their little book and on that podcast is a factor in some of these is marijuana. That we don't want to deal with the fact that legalizing this drug is not just nicotine. It's not just harmful to your lungs, although it is. There's got another interesting contradiction they point out. In an age when smoking is banned everywhere of tobacco, we're promoting like another thing that's smoking and does exactly what tobacco does to your lungs, beyond which it's may be contributing to this increase in violence. But the real interesting point that is true here is nobody wants to talk about it. Utter silence. Nobody's saying, hey, maybe Colorado's got it wrong, and this is actually not good for society, but you can't talk about it because legalizing pot, legalizing mutilation and hormone therapy is the current thing, and you can't ask questions about it.
No, yeah, it's something that I think is often neglected here is that the transgender shootings aren't that rare, except they just usually shoot themselves, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The suicide rates absurdly high. Last time I checked, it was around 40%, and actually went up after with post-operation patients, so people who had the general mutilation surgeries. So what I think we need to say, because the transgender activists will say, well, that's due to transphobia in society, which I really don't think you see much of if you're in left-wing bubbles. You actually get a lot of attention,
Yeah.
especially young people will often become transgender simply to get out of, for example, bullying in schools. They want more attention. They want more positive attention from their peers, from their left-leaning peers. So what I think we need to see what's obvious is that these people are not mentally sane, and we shouldn't be surprised that these people are going out and shooting. Another thing, you mentioned the marijuana issue, and I think that's important because I think it shows a general societal trend, which is that people are looking almost everyone I've seen that's stuck in these sorts of either the LGBTQAI double A plus whatever community, or in stuck within drug addiction, including marijuana addiction, which it oftentimes turns into. All
Yeah.
of these people generally have some sort of Nietzschean morality, or the morality of somebody like Jean-Paul Sartre, which is very internal. It's stuck in the you. And there's a big problem with that nowadays in society. It's very narcissistic. And what I think we need to tell these people is that your life is not about you. You need to look outside of yourself. Catholicism has a great solution to that, which is actually about God, and that you don't have to find all these solutions to life, which is oftentimes painful. I mean, anybody who's lived can tell you that life is oftentimes painful, and it's not up to you to satisfy that. It's up to God. And that's what we need to tell these people more and more. That's not some sort of pious platitude. It's a real solution to these people's problems. These people are of the opinion that God is dead, that they need to find a solution for their own moral life, that for their own mental anguish that they're feeling, and there needs to be a solution to that in their spirituality, and that affects their moral life in general. This needs to become. We need to be more and more aware of this. But this is a psychological problem in society with all of this godless society that we have today. All of morality is absent, and we need the true solution, which is what we're trying to find in Lent, which is God Almighty.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, speaking of what trying to find, our last story, another theme we've been reporting on for years, this push to fabricate these female deaconesses. We got a little report that may be on the table again.
Yes, and I know there's gonna be some people who are like, "Oh, Catholic Family News, you'll say this forever. You'll say, but there will never be deaconesses." Well, people were saying that about same-sex blessings until like yesterday,
Right.
until it actually came into fruition. This is coming from a report that Francis is, quote, very much in favor of the female diaconate, which is what the secularized sister Linda Poacher told religiondigital.org. And look, there's not a whole lot of substance to this because of the nature of the pontiff himself. He's not going to make a clear statement like this, but I want to point out that there's a very clear precedent, and I want to suggest how he'll get this by, which is that we actually have to look over to the Eastern Orthodox with the Alexandrian Patriarchate. He has allowed the patriarch over there the women to receive some sort of pseudo diaconate, some sort of deaconess role. Now, the Orthodox will quibble, saying, "Well, it's not actually liturgical. It's not actually sacramental." Well, there's different interpretations to that, and what the fact is that Alexandria has allowed that. And of course, what Pope Francis can easily say, sometimes trads can get detached from the reality of the situation in the new church. Every single Novus Ordo parish you go to is going to have female altar servers. You're going to have females oftentimes distributing communion. Why not make them a deaconess? They're doing the same thing. What would a deacon be doing that's different than this? Well, they get to hold the hosts. They get to distribute communion. They get to act in the liturgy as with a liturgical role. What difference would it make?
Giving the readings. Some of them
Yeah.
are preaching. Some of them are actually preaching.
Yes. So what are you gonna? What's different? Just the fact that a deacon can't say the words of consecration anyways, so nothing would really change. So the conservative Catholics throwing a fit about this, saying this will never in a million years happen. Goodness gracious, already is happening. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see this. Pope Francis, I expect, is going to start getting more and more. I mean, we've seen him. He's going to get more and more desperate when it comes to making these last-ditch efforts to incorporate his vision of a synodal church, to fix, we need more ministers throughout the world to help with the global problem we have. And I imagine that his solution will likely be putting women into some sort of, not sacramental maybe, but some sort of official role, which he'll call deaconess, and with the sort of antiquarian ideas that we often see with these type of people. They'll say, well, look, the early church was doing it, which is a myth. There was no sacramental deaconess in the early church, and not in any sense of what we would imagine a deaconess doing. So, but there definitely is a way he can do this, and I imagine that that's what he will do.
I think you're right on the money here. And we have Fiducia's Supplicans as the model. So I think what you outline is exactly what he'll do. He'll say, from now on, women can preach, they do things mostly that they're already doing, can be called deaconess, can go through an installation ceremony where a hand is placed on their head. They can wear a dalmatic, but they're not getting sacramental diaconate. So when I make someone a deacon, I'm not making them a deacon. When I bless a couple, I'm not blessing the couple. I mean, I think you're exactly right. He'll say, "Oh, I'm not changing the sacramental theology. I'm not conferring the sacrament on them. I'm just making them a deaconess, so they act like a deacon, dress like a deacon, speak like a deacon, get a ceremony that's not an ordination but looks like an ordination." Is exactly the model that he has used, and I think you're right. When he's in favor of, that's probably what he's in favor of.
Yeah. I
And
imagine
again,
yeah.
he commissioned female bishops with the Anglicans in Rome on January 25th, sent them out as, quote, and treated them as bishops. So ecumenism demands this.
Yeah, ecumenism, and I will imagine he will reference the Patriarch of Alexandria as well. So this is what the state of the church at the moment. It's I imagine that's what it's going to be, and it's not looking very good. But we're in Lent, so we need to pray for the Pope. We need to pray for the church at large.
Absolutely, we need to. So there you have it, our beginning of the first half week of Lent, what's been going on. Thank you for joining us, and please help us by sharing and liking this video, subscribing to our channels. We are on YouTube and Rumble. Do keep an eye on Rumble in case, for some reason, this video said a lot of interesting things this week, may disappear, right? If it does, look over on Rumble. And thank you for supporting us that way. Remember, you can support us with purchases from either Sophia Institute Press or today's sponsor, Angelico Press, as well. See the links in the video. And we will be announcing more partnerships, so you can buy good Catholic literature and help us at the same time as the the weeks unfold. So thank you, and please consider subscribing to our newspaper, Catholic Family News. So let's bow down our heads and pray for Our Lady's intercession. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Eternal Father, offer you the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ and all the instruments of his holy passion, that thou may put division in the camp of thy enemy. For thus thy beloved Son has said, a kingdom divided against itself shall fall. Our Lady of Fatima.
Pray for us.
In the name of the Father, and Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Well, I hope you have another holy week in Lent. We'll see you next week at the end of the first week, and may you persevere in your Lenten resolutions.
You as well.